That was the most amazing goosebumpy dream, and now we also absolutely galvanized watching the next South African making worldwide ripples in Elon Musk and Falcon Heavy recently, which must have been like one of the most watched things ever online. But back in the day, when Mark sold his company, he darkened our doorway one day and he said, "I've got this crazy idea. I want to fly to space." And he remembered that a few years prior to that, we project managed a trip across Africa, where we drove from the northern tip of Africa to the southern tip of Africa, a convoy of Mitsubishi Pajeros from Bazar, north of Tunis, all the way to Cape Agulhas. And it was a campaign to promote investment in telecommunications across Africa, to say that Africa missed the digital revolution. Africa missed the industrial revolution. They can't afford to miss the digital revolution. So that was lovely. And that captivated Mark's imagination. So he remembered us as the Mad Hatters who did that gig. And then he came across and he says, "Well, would you like to do this for us as well?" And the nicest thing about Mark is that we knew him before it was fashionable to know him. So when we set up this company and we wanted access to the internet, so he would be walking around in shorts and slops in this office, or the previous office, doing some digital plumbing to connect us to the internet, the proto-internet in 94, 95. And so when he did this, so absolutely exciting, and gave us all of 90 seconds, and we decided we're going to do it. And it was the most kind of a surreal experience, because we then set up an office in Moscow, and we lived through a Russian winter. The office was firstly operating out of a hotel on Tverskaya Avenue in Moscow, and then we moved to Star City. So we lived with the cosmonauts in a beautiful old building called the Profilectorium, called it the Profi for short, and subsequently started to engage with the Russian Space Agency in terms of the content that we were going to do there. And we helped him with flight negotiations, legal, and then all the way through to creating a platform to promote this entire trip, and that was Hip to Be Square. It was just absolutely phenomenal, and the nicest thing is that we've prided ourselves here, since we set up this company, on not doing stuff that's really about a formula, and really about stuff where there's no manual, and you have to make it up as you go along. So there's a certain bespoke nature about this. And when we started our discussions with the Russian Space Agency, and we said to them, "Hey, is it possible to do any experiments at the International Space Station?" And at that time, Dennis Tito had just been up, and he was just listening to music and tripping out and looking out the window. And Mark decided that he was going to be a Trojan and he was going to do work out there. And so we ran a process with academics throughout Southern Africa, submitted proposals as to what they could do in microgravity. And we ran that project. Then we pitched to DSTV that we could have the first African space channel. So all of a sudden we became this channel owner with live links to the International Space Station and Medivh speaking to the cosmonauts. And it just grew. It's just this massive, massive platform. It was the biggest news item in the country in the year 2002. And it really, truly made Mark an icon. And for us as an experience, I mean, it was something that was like a boy's own dream. It checked all the boxes, space mostly. And I remember the day when we were at mission control in Moscow with all the screens in front of you as the Soyuz blasted off from Baikonur in Kazakhstan. And we just was all holding hands, and we just cried ourselves a river. It was really, really an amazing experience to watch a Soyuz blasting off from Baikonur with a South African flag on the fuselage. It was absolutely goosebumpy. So that was a lot of fun. And as I described it to you, I go right the way back there and I have goosebumps all over again. Yeah, you see, I didn't come at design from being a practicing designer or even being involved in the design field. I'm a scientist with a business degree. I spent 2.5 years in advertising. I worked at Y&R, and it was wonderful. But then I was working with a bunch of young designers in Cape Town who just felt that design was not given its just deserves. And design was always the kind of Cinderella discipline, and particularly in the 90s, where advertising really held sway. And we had these massive agencies, and Right Foot, Soul, Trip, and Macon were absolutely killing it, as were Sonnenbergs and a whole bunch of absolute herd boys that just started. Advertising was a big deal in this country. So we decided to back the nag in the race, and we started this. But I think the more important thing was we came at design from a more strategic standpoint. I love design. I'm an aesthete. I love beautiful things. But I think design goes way beyond color, texture, and form. And we were more interested in design from its point of view of impact, and particularly intrigued by how design could do more than service brands, but serve people. And what was the real purpose for design? So we had a bit of a first mover advantage back in 1995 by being the kind of first people to assert this, where design was still very much in a mercantile circumstance. The big design events were trade fairs, and they were peddling lighting and chairs. And we were coming at design from a bit more of an intellectual, more cerebral standpoint, and asked, what is it for, and how could it go beyond being just a handmade into consumption? How can it possibly do more to serve people? So and so beyond the immersive experience, we've almost always had this kind of activist orientation. You would see from the space trip or the rally across Africa or the pitch for the Soccer World Cup, all of the projects that we've ever done has not been with the mentality of an event organizer. It's never been about bums and seats. It's always had a bigger sense of purpose and a sense of mission. And so even in corralling people together to come and celebrate the best exponents of creativity, it was always to say that that's not the end, it's a means to an end. And so we always had this kind of duality between think tank and do tank, and learning only so that we could convert to doing, and set up that process very, very early days. And to say as well that, from our absolute abiding motivation with Design Indaba is from the very, very first day that the entire experience of putting it together had to be something which would help to spark a whole level of engagement with this next generation of African creators, and to be able to help us in reimagining South Africa and reimagining Africa. So you must understand the period in which we were doing it. We were all sipping the Kool-Aid of the Mandela era. It was beautiful. We were punch drunk. We were so excited. We all wanted to be bigger than ourselves. And I think it was a particular time. I don't think we could have started it in the Zuma era, for example. It was that particular point in time when we were feeling expansive and we wanted to flex outside where we were. So it had this element about it. And then we came at it from a simple strategic view. And here's the nub of why we did Design Indaba. South Africa historically had this preoccupation with resources. For large chunks of the 20th century, we produced about 70% of the world's gold right here. So we basically had a mentality in this country with this huge mining heritage. 1871 discovery of diamonds, 1886 discovery of gold, and we built an entire industries on the back of that. And we basically had this mentality that said the value was in the earth. And the pivot that we wanted to start to create in 1994 was that the value was in the people. That we have to go beyond a resources extractive kind of mentality to say that this is the prime real estate and the value is in here. And that was a very, very important thing. And in order to be able to show that, we had to bring exemplars and exponents of this valuable alchemy. And to go back to that whole metal metaphor, mining, the Philosopher's Stone was about converting pig iron into gold. And people were in search of the Philosopher's Stone. And we think the Philosopher's Stone really is this beautiful alchemy that you see there even in Design Indaba right now, of people who can convert ideas into reality. That's the philosopher's stone. That's the ultimate alchemy. And we wanted to present this as the new model for this country, to say that the real gold was not 3 kilometers below Jozi, it's walking in the streets of Jozi. And if we could recognize that human potential, and if we could recognize this ability that if we mind our own stories, if we mind our heritage, if we could then go out and convert our ideas, this generation will fire up something that may be bigger than the mining industry. Our ultimate dream, when you open up the business day and you look at the stock index and you go down mining, industrials, tourism, retail, etc., there's a massive category in the future that says creative industries. And listed there is a whole raft of businesses that are being purely leveraged of IP. I feel quite paternalistic about Design Indaba. I happen to be there at its conception. So, and I really do feel like even when we have folks coming out from all around the world, like people say to me, pick the one day we should come. I said, I can't do that. It's like a parent picking your favorite child. That's not right. And secondly, it's also to say that there's a very peculiar thing that happens at Design Indaba. And this is a human frailty we have. We go for the big brand, we go for the big name. But when you go to an experience like Design Indaba, I think the difference is between expectation and what the person delivers on. And sometimes the bigger delta, the bigger difference between that is what increases your levels of satisfaction and you have a blow-out experience. And sometimes when somebody you expect there delivers there, it's amazing. When you get a superstar who's there but still delivers there, that delta is tiny. So it's all about the delta. And so we try to create this program as well where we love to go and ferret out that person that you've never heard before. I remember like back in the day, if you asked me about one standout, I loved, for example, Marcus Fairs last year, the editor of DZ, the world's biggest design publication. He's on camera saying it, and it's worthwhile getting it actually, where he said he came to Design Indaba and he didn't recognize so many of the names in the program. So we were able to surprise the editor of the biggest design publication in the world. It means that we're doing a good job in sleuthing and ferreting out these nuggets that are all around the world. And that R&D and that time and energy it takes to find that certain get surprised, because we're not traipsing around the regular fairs and whatever. You're not going to find those surprises. And one of my favorite was some years ago, Francis Kera, this amazing architect from Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. And he presented, and it was just amazing. He cried, we cried. It was just a phenomenally beautiful, optimistic presentation of what Africa could be. And at the time in 2011, he was not exactly a household figure. Last year, he built the Serpentine Pavilion. And so I love the fact sometimes that Design Indaba has had this ability to be a bit of a first mover in telegraphing people who would go on to do big things. So much about our relationship with Thomas Heatherwick was our relationship. We've grown up with him. He first was here in 2005. He'd only ever done one building in 2005. But on the strength of that, we thought, here be somebody really interesting, particularly with all of his other sculptural projects that he had done. And he was out here. Yves Behar was here in that same year, and he had just about to do and launch the $100 laptop. And prior to that, hadn't really shut the lights out. But look at what he's done subsequently. So we are also quite proud of being able to find and sleuth out and find these some of these stars of tomorrow. And I think David Ajay is another. When he was out here in a similar kind of vintage, and he had just done bars and restaurants up until then. And I think one of the real joys here is to see the growth and development of not only the international superstars, but even our homegrown talent as well, a guy like Laduma or whatever. I mean, it gives me, because the absolute wonderful reverb and joy to spot that trajectory and to follow the shooting star. It's really amazing. The first is a simple mensch test. That's such a gorgeous Yiddish word, mensch.
Oh, you're a good mensch.
Yeah, I don't think there are too many English parallels. It's a feel. And it's funny. I spent half of my life being super focused on things like science, which means if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. And I spent the other half of my life trying to be involved in more of the feel and feel energy. And sometimes, so what we do with Design Indaba in particular is that we've got a very old-fashioned mentality of making it. Very handmade. No one's invited until you met them first. And so when you sit with somebody's company and you feel the energy and you can see as to whether they are a distant relative of the human race or whether they have a generosity of spirit. And if you feel that, then you start the relationship. Don't go off inviting anybody first. We go and visit people, we see them in situ, we see them in their studio. We start up a conversation about what it is that they're doing. And if we really like them, we invite them. So I think that's important. And I famously was invited to a New York studio to see a power couple. And when I got there, and you must understand, I traveled from Cape Town, everywhere I go is long haul. And they asked me to wait. They weren't ready to talk to me. And I thought, well, no, I only traveled 16,000 kilometers to get to you. But I says, can you come back in an hour and a half? So I didn't quite know what to do. I was kind of backed up afterwards. So I went downstairs and there was a Korean nail salon. So I went in and had a manicure and a pedicure. What do? You need to fill up some time. And then I go back up and they pull out the laptop and they give me a presentation of all that they do. And then all the time, long haul traveler, they don't so much as offer you a glass of water. And I thought, and it's just those kinds of cues. And guess what? I never invited them.
No, I'm sure you didn't.
And so we set a very, very high bar for Design Indaba. I do believe that one of the best gifts we can give to Africa is to take Africa seriously and to love Africa enough that you don't give it sloppy compromises. Africa doesn't deserve a B-grade trundle. Africa does deserve superstars. And Africa deserves the best we can get in the world. So we set the bar really, really high. We want to talk to the principal. And they say to us, can we send our PRO? We said, no, thank you. We want the person with the cuts and bruises and the real stories from this voyage of discovery in terms of the creative rites of passage in this creative process. And we don't want somebody who's going to give us a very well-articulated corporate spiel and a credentials pitch. That's not the story we want. And so we do the mensch test, of course we do the charisma test, and all too often right now as well, all the time right now, they must do more than talk. They have to do. And that scares a lot of them, because they say, well, God, I don't have the time to do anything. And you would just notice the number of people. By the way, we just launched today in the App Store the project that we did with Zach Lieberman. So you should go and download it. It's phenomenal. And we just launched our new app, Weird Time, with Zach.
Definitely do.
And the guy came to speak, and then we also produced an entire new app, you know? So the energy that goes to a Design Indaba presentation is way beyond the 30-minute talk. It could be, in that instance of this app, hundreds of hours that was completely connected with making that talk. So there's a level of production and there's a level of intensity about it that they take maybe quite seriously. You can see their prep, you can see the production values where you descend from the ceiling in a gold spacesuit. You can see it in the kind of stuff that leaves the room with a Morag 15-meter high sculpture. You must be prepared to roll up your sleeves, that we have them permanently rolled up, smell like an armpit, and do. And if you don't have the capacity to do, we're not terribly interested.
proper.
I reckon, how sad it'll be if you just really believe that the best years will be behind you. I mean, that's no reason for being, right? So, first departure point is the best years are ahead of us. I think, if you really look at it, we've been slagged off on between 10 and 5. It's really a terrible low blow. Bit of a hit job on an article there that basically took a photograph of 3 rows of Design Indaba and then made a pronouncement that Design Indaba was all about white privilege. And not spoke to me, not talk about anything else that happened to stride it. I mean, a complete hit job. But, the one thing, though, that we really do understand is that in order to have impact, in order to make something that's truly sustainable, and to shift consciousness and to shift behavior, it's not a just add water, instant gratification thing. So we put 23 years into this. We may have to put about another 17 into it before we get the kind of critical mass where we have embedded a culture of design to society. When you compare ourselves with the Scandinavians, when you compare yourselves with the Italians, these are decades and decades of building a design culture in that community. When you go and look at a catalog of a company in Scandinavia, and it'll give you an alto piece from 1940s, who would we call upon if we had to look at a South African back catalog of something that was created in the 1940s or the 50s? So we've got some river to cover in order to be able to create a deep design culture and creative culture in the society, because we were bipolar for so long about politics and sport, and we're adding so much texture in between. But we need an entire new generation of creative exponents in the society, and we need a critical mass of them. And at the moment, part of my problem, and part of that slagging off and that terrible hit piece, is that it points to exceptionalism and what we must do. And it's a combination of so many factors. There's only so much that 3-day event can do. We can't change the industry over 3 days. We can't change the educational system over 3 days. You have to look at all of this, in a very systemic way. But I really think that we've built up a head of steam. We've got some proper momentum in our category the world over. We do hold sway now.
Yeah.
We get invited the world over to do similar kind of things. So whether it's curating a new exhibition at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian in New York, or being on the jury of the world's richest design prize, or helping the Design Museum select the Design of the Year this year, or creating a new platform with Helsinki Design Week, or creating a new platform with the Dutch Design Week. In our little niche, we do hold sway, but we really do think, though, that our best years are ahead of us. And I don't mean this with any degree of hubris or no arrogance whatsoever. I'm only just doing it, especially to galvanize my team as well, to really lean forward optimistically and positively into the future and be suitably incentivized to think that there's so much more we can do and there's so many more things to be accomplished, and never to rest on our laurels. So, already plans are for next year's version. In fact, there are about 10 speakers booked for next year already.
I was going to ask you, when do you start?
You never stop. You're doing all of these things in parallel. So there's never this kind of very neat start, finish. It's a series of parallel streams that you're running. And we've got a project that will see the light of day in 2020. And we've got some live things that will come through in 2019. But such is the nature of the kind of people we're dealing with, who are highly sought after. We've got, they're not exactly sitting near the phone waiting for us to phone them to call them. They really, so we also have to work with all of that. But I'm super excited. I think there's a new project. I think Design Indaba needs a permanent home as well in Cape Town. We were very involved with that whole project around Mocha, which initially was thought to be a Design Indaba home. But the economics didn't work out, and so we stepped out of it at the 11th hour with no rancor, no remorse. It just was something where we realized that if we do it, we must actually own the land. we must own the title, but EFF in Atlanta own the land, and as opposed to be a tenant. And so we thought for all of the effort, the return was not commensurate with the effort. So and maybe we'll find a different model, and maybe we'll do it on the high street, and maybe we'll do it in a kind of way where you just come off the sidewalk and you go into this hyper accessible space that's not a cultural citadel, but more accessible. So we've got some ideas germinating about what that could be like. So that could be a very viable project going forward. And the other project I'd really like to do is to do more things across Africa. So we've got this germ of an idea here called Studio 54. And Studio 54 is about 54 projects for the 54 countries in Africa to create a studio to service 54 projects in Africa. And I was actually just riffing with Thomas the other day, head of it, and we were just starting to say as to what this could look like and how we start to develop this brief. And I want to start by doing it in the hardest place. Do it in Chad, or do it in Central African Republic, or do it in Niger, and not just go for Abidjan and Dakar and Nairobi. And in time, love to have a constellation of projects of various scales. It's not about the scale. It's just about having these little pieces of acupuncture in across 54 countries in Africa. Would be a wonderful kind of future airy goal.